9 black celebrities who are bald that you didn't know about. Before the lights hit, some legends fought a battle no one applauded. Not with rivals with the mirror. One thinning spot, one bad angle, one unexpected flash could turn a respected black icon into a cruel joke overnight. So they learned to hide it. Hats, hairpieces, perfect lighting, perfect timing. And the cost wasn't just cosmetic, it was pride, peace, and sometimes their health. If you think fame makes life easier, this will change your mind. Like this video, subscribe to the Black Excellence list and turn on notifications because what you're about to hear isn't gossip. It's the price of perfection. Wilson Pickett. He didn't fear the microphone, he feared the mirror. Wilson Pickett built his public life on power. In the mid-1960s, he wasn't just another soul singer. He was a headline act, a man whose voice sounded like it could crack a wall. In the Midnight Hour went #1 on the R&B chart and reached number 21 on the Hot 100 in 1965, turning him into a symbol of confidence and control. Night after night, the audience saw the same image, sharp suit commanding posture, and that unmistakable hard-edged delivery. The persona was clear. This was Wicked Pickett, untouchable, fearless, forever in charge. But behind the spotlight, the rules were different. For male stars of that era, especially black stars navigating TV cameras, promoters, and an industry obsessed with youth appearance wasn't a detail. It was currency. Hairlines shifted, the lights got harsher, and rumors traveled faster than truth. Pickett rarely talked about personal worries because in that world, admitting insecurity could be treated like weakness. So the struggle stayed private, keeping the public image intact while silently negotiating what aging and pressure were doing to his body and confidence. What fans read as swagger could also be a shield, something he wore to make sure nobody looked too closely. If your image paid the bills, how much pain would you hide to protect it? The turning point is that the invincible mask couldn't cover everything forever. As the years moved on, turbulence entered the public record, legal trouble, and headlines that shifted attention away from music and onto personal collapse. That kind of scrutiny doesn't just damage reputation. It tightens the private war with self, because now the world is judging not only the performance, but the man underneath it. And yet the lasting consequence of Pickett's struggle is complicated in the best way. His legacy survived the damage. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1991. A formal acknowledgement that whatever happened later, his impact on soul music was already permanent. Even decades after his peak, the myth people wanted strength, heat authority was still anchored to the records. Pickett died of a heart attack on January 19, 2006 at 64. But the story that remains isn't just about fame or trouble. It's about the title's truth behind the spotlight. Wilson Pickett carried the pressure to look unbreakable and the private struggle to keep that image from slipping, while his voice kept roaring as if nothing could touch him. George Clinton. He didn't just wear a hairstyle, he wore an entire universe. To the public, George Clinton was never just a funk frontman. He was the ringmaster of Parliament Funkadelic, the architect of a stage world where capes, colors, and cosmic mythology turned concerts into traveling theater. Born July 22, 1941, Clinton built a sound that still feels like a dare, loosen up, break the rules, and don't apologize for taking space. By the time the P-Funk mothership imagery became pop culture shorthand, his look was part of the message. Hair extensions, headpieces, and wild silhouettes that announced freedom before he even sang a note. In 1997, that impact was formally sealed when Parliament Funkadelic entered the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, a rare nod to a collective that changed how black music could look and sound on a massive scale. But behind the spotlight, the flamboyance also had a quieter job control. In the entertainment business, especially in the decades when Clinton rose, aging wasn't allowed to be ordinary. It had to be hidden, reimagined, turned into spectacle. And hair is often where that battle becomes personal. For many men, especially performers constantly under hot lights and constant scrutiny, thinning hair can feel less like a cosmetic issue and more like a leak in the armor. Clinton's signature outer space style gave him a powerful advantage. If your image is already surreal, you can protect your private realities inside the costume. The turning point for Clinton wasn't a single headline. It was the long grind of pressure meeting business chaos. The P-Funk story includes years of disputes over royalties and rights, a draining fight that can sour even the most joyful music. Add the wear and tear of touring, the temptations that stalk late-night fame, and the constant demand to stay iconic, and you start to understand why a man might choose larger than life as both art and defense. When your brand is the party, you can feel trapped performing the party even when you're exhausted, even when your body changes, even when you'd rather disappear for a while. And yet this is where Clinton's legacy hits harder than gossip. He transformed the very idea of image. Instead of pretending to be perfect, he made imperfection irrelevant by making imagination the center of the frame. Even his solo era carried that stamp. Atomic Dog, released in December 1982, became a cultural landmark and hit #1 on the R&B chart, later fueling generations of hip-hop and G-funk through sampling and attitude. The man didn't just protect a look, he built a template for how black artists could own style as mythology, not as apology. So the lasting consequence of Clinton's private struggle, whether it was hair aging or the weight of being watched, wasn't a collapse. It was a creative solution. Turn the spotlight into a spaceship. He proved that you don't have to surrender dignity to time. You can remix it, costume it, and fly it straight through the ceiling. Funk first, fear second. Ron O'Neal. A legend can be built on a silhouette, and for Ron O'Neal, that silhouette included hair. When Ron O'Neal exploded onto screens as Youngblood Priest in Superfly, released August 4, 1972, he didn't just play a character, he embodied an era's idea of untouchable cool. Priest was tailored, unbothered, and always a step ahead, framed by the kind of long, sleek hair audiences instantly read as youth, swagger, and control. In a genre where style carried as much meaning as dialogue, that look wasn't decoration, it was part of the performance's authority. A year later, O'Neal doubled down on his own agency by directing and starring in Superfly TNT. 1973, proving he wasn't content to be merely the face of a trend. He wanted the steering wheel. But the spotlight has a cruel habit. It rewards you for one image, then punishes you for becoming a person. O'Neal spent much of his career wrestling with the shadow of Youngblood Priest, typecasting expectations, and the unspoken rule that the ultra-hip icon must remain visually frozen in time. And that is where the private struggle fits the title. For men in front of cameras especially, black men who fought for every inch of space, aging wasn't neutral. It was treated like a leak in the brand. Hairlines shift, density changes, texture evolves, and suddenly the face the world knows starts to feel like a costume you're expected to wear forever. Whether O'Neal was experiencing thinning, guarding against it, or simply carrying the fear of it, the pressure is the same. Keep the myth intact. If the world only paid you for the version of you they first fell for, would you dare to show them the rest? The turning point wasn't one public confession, it was the slow squeeze of identity. The more iconic Superfly became, the narrower the lane could feel. O'Neal kept working, and he showed range in later years, appearing on television and stepping into roles with a different kind of authority. On A Different World, he played Mercer Gilbert Whitley's father, a polished, grown man presence that couldn't be further from the street-gloss fantasy of Youngblood Priest. Yet even then, audiences often carried the old image in their heads, the long-haired, razor-cool figure who seemed immune to consequence. That's the consequence that follows many stars. The public remembers the poster, not the private reality. O'Neal died on January 14, 2004 at 66, after a long battle with pancreatic cancer. A reminder that the body always has the final word, no matter how flawless the lighting. And still, the legacy keeps moving. Superfly was later selected for preservation in the U.S. National Film Registry, 2022, which says something blunt and lasting. Whatever the controversies around the era, the film and O'Neal's presence at its center remains culturally significant. In the end, Ron O'Neal's story isn't just about a hairstyle or a role. It's about what happens when fame turns a look into a life sentence and how much quiet effort it can take to protect the image while the man behind it keeps changing. Bobby DeBarge. Silence can be louder than a sold-out crowd, especially when the thing you're hiding is on your own head. To the public, Bobby DeBarge looked like the kind of star the late 1970s were built to celebrate a romantic voice, a smooth falsetto, and a presence that made audiences believe the good times could last forever. As the lead singer of Switch, he helped define an era of sleek, radio-friendly soul music that felt elegant, controlled, and effortless. The image mattered. Bobby wasn't marketed as rough around the edges. He was presented as polished, the handsome frontman, with the hair, the charm, the light in his eyes, the promise that the spotlight itself could never wear him down. But behind the spotlight, the body doesn't negotiate with fame. In the early 1990s, Bobby's health declined, and the world he lived in, an industry that feeds on beauty and certainty, left very little room for visible weakness. Hair loss when it arrives through illness isn't the slow, familiar thinning people joke about. It can feel sudden, unfair, almost violent, like the mirror is erasing you in real time. For a performer whose public identity had always been tied to youth allure and having it together, the private fear isn't merely cosmetic. It's existential. If the look changes, will the love disappear too? Bobby's turning point wasn't a dramatic onstage collapse. It was a retreat. As his life narrowed, privacy became protection. Not because he was ashamed of being sick, but because the world around him wasn't kind about sickness, especially HIV/AIDS at that time. The stigma was brutal. The rumors were cruel, and the press could turn a person's pain into a spectacle. So Bobby pulled the curtains. Instead of letting people watch him transform, he kept his struggle mostly out of public view, guarding his dignity with the few tools he still controlled: distant silence and the careful management of how he was seen. In that context, covering a changing scalp, whether with hats, wraps, or simply avoidance, can become less about vanity and more about survival. It's the last line of defense against being reduced to a headline. The consequence is heartbreaking and complicated. Bobby DeBarge died on August 16, 1995 at 39 from complications related to AIDS. His story became part of a wider tragedy, a generation of artists and families touched by a crisis that the culture too often misunderstood. Yet his legacy didn't vanish with his privacy. If anything, the distance he created forces us to listen differently. You hear the tenderness in his voice and realize it came from somewhere real, not from a marketing team, not from stage lights, but from a human being carrying more weight than the audience could ever see. Behind the spotlight, Bobby's private struggle with hair loss wasn't the story people consumed. It was a symptom of something deeper, the cost of fame when illness enters the room. And the lasting impact is this: his music remains still smooth, still aching, still beautiful, while the lesson stays with us. Icons don't stop being human when the camera turns away. Sylvester James Jr. He could light up a dance floor like a sunrise, then go backstage and face a silence that no applause could fill. To the public, Sylvester James Jr. was more than a singer. He was a spectacle of joy, a fearless performer who made glamour feel like liberation. In the late 1970s, when disco ruled the night, Sylvester wasn't simply riding the wave, he was defining the look and the mood, sequins, confidence, and a voice that soared above the drums like a promise. "When You Make Me Feel Mighty Real" became a signature anthem. Audiences didn't just hear music, they saw a symbol. The public image was electric, a man who seemed untouchable, a star who could turn fear into celebration just by stepping into the light. But behind the spotlight, the era carried a shadow. In the 1980s, as HIV/AIDS tore through communities, especially in cities like San Francisco, the price of being seen could be terrifying. For Sylvester, the private struggle wasn't only about illness, it was about identity under siege. The body changes, strength drains. And for a performer whose entire career was built on radiance, hair loss becomes more than a cosmetic detail. It becomes a cruel marker of vulnerability. When hair disappears due to illness and harsh treatments, it can feel like the mirror is stripping away the very version of you the world expects. In that moment, wigs and styling aren't vanity. They're armor. One last way to walk on stage as the person your fans need, even if you don't feel like him anymore. If the crowd came to see a legend, would you let them witness the pain that made you one? The turning point was the exhausting reality that the show must go on while the body says it can't. As Sylvester's health declined, the performance became a balancing act, keeping the image intact while privately grappling with what was happening underneath. The heavier the burden, the more important the mask could feel. A wig could become a ritual not just to look right, but to reclaim control over a body that no longer obeyed. It's a small detail that carries massive meaning, because in a world that often punished weakness with pity or cruelty, choosing how you appear is sometimes the last freedom you have. The consequence of that hidden struggle is the way it reshapes his legacy. Sylvester died on December 16, 1988 at 41, but he refused to be remembered as a tragedy. His artistry remains as a blueprint for defiant joy, proof that a black queer performer could be bold, glamorous, and uncompromising long before the culture had the language to celebrate it properly. The private battle with baldness framed by illness doesn't diminish him, it deepens him. It shows the cost of radiance, the unseen work required to keep shining when everything inside is dimming. Behind the spotlight, Sylvester's story becomes more than disco history. It becomes a human truth sometimes. The most mighty, real courage is not what you sing. It's what you carry quietly as you walk back out into the light. Eddie Kendricks. He could hit a falsetto so clean it sounded immortal, yet he couldn't stop time from changing what the world saw. To the public, Eddie Kendricks was refinement in motion. As a defining voice of the Temptations, he stood for the kind of polished masculinity that America loved to applaud: crisp suits, controlled choreography, and a sound that stayed silky even when the band hit emotional storms. The image was not accidental. In that era, a black male star had to look together at all times because the camera and the culture were waiting for any crack. Hair especially carried meaning, youth, discipline, desirability. So keeping the look intact wasn't a vanity project. It was part of the job. But behind the spotlight, Kendricks faced the private pressure that comes with being known as the elegant one. When your reputation is built on smoothness, every sign of aging feels louder. A receding hairline, thinning at the crown, fatigue in the face, small changes can trigger big fear when you've been trained to believe that your audience is buying the illusion of perfection. Kendricks rarely framed himself as vulnerable in public. He performed calm, even when life demanded something else. The turning point was illness. Kendricks was diagnosed with lung cancer, underwent major surgery in late 1991, and continued to push forward as his health declined. That's where the private struggle becomes. Most real sickness doesn't only threaten your life, it threatens the face you present to the world. When the body weakens, it can change everything that fans assume is permanent: stamina, weight, skin, and yes, hair. For a performer whose identity was built on looking composed and camera-ready, those changes can feel like losing control in public. Kendricks died on October 5, 1992, at 52. The consequence for his legacy is not embarrassment or rumor. It's a sharper, more human understanding of the cost of staying perfect. People still remember the voice and the elegance, but the title tells the deeper truth behind the spotlight. Eddie Kendricks carried the pressure to remain flawless, while his body fought a battle he couldn't choreograph. His legacy endures because the music survived the illusion, and because the strength wasn't in never changing, but in showing up anyway. Paul Williams' The Temptations. His steps stayed sharp until his body started missing the beat. On stage, Paul Williams looked like discipline made visible. As one of the original members of The Temptations, he carried himself with the calm authority of a man who knew every mark on the floor and every cue in the music. In the 1960s, that polish was the brand-matching suits, synchronized moves, and a smooth vocal blend that made the group feel unstoppable. Audiences saw a performer who could glide through choreography with a measured elegance, the kind that made the whole act look effortless. When fans talked about The Temptations, they talked about precision, and Paul helped set that standard with a presence that felt steady, reliable, and refined. But away from the cameras, the story tightened. Paul lived with serious health challenges, including sickle cell disease, and over time his condition affected his stamina and consistency. Touring is brutal even when you're healthy. When you're not, it can feel like your own body is working against your career. As the demands kept piling up, travel rehearsals, late nights, constant expectations, Paul's endurance began to crack. Depression and heavy drinking entered the picture not as tabloid drama, but as the kind of slow erosion that can happen when pain becomes routine and rest never lasts long enough. And then there was Image, the quiet pressure men rarely confessed to in that era. The Temptations were marketed as timeless, clean lines, youthful energy, perfectly controlled presentation. When hair begins thinning or a hairline shifts, it can hit harder than outsiders understand because it feels like the world is watching the perfect version of you fade. In an industry where every photo, every TV appearance, every close-up matters, small changes can become an obsession. How do you keep selling perfection when you don't feel whole? By the early 1970s, the turning point arrived. Paul's health made touring increasingly difficult, and he stepped back from regular performing duties around 1971. That kind of shift is more than a career move. It's an identity wound. Imagine being part of a machine built on unity and precision, then realizing you can't keep up with the pace. For a performer who lived in rhythm, losing physical control can feel like losing your name. The consequences were devastating. On August 17, 1973, Paul Williams was found dead in Detroit from a gunshot wound. His death was ruled an apparent suicide, though questions and speculation have followed for decades. He was only 34. The tragedy left a permanent shadow over one of the greatest groups in American music. Not because it defined the band, but because it revealed the cost of holding an image together while a life is unraveling. Paul's legacy, however, didn't disappear into that darkness. The Temptations were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1989, and Paul's place in that history is secure: the voice, the movement, the elegance that helped make the group a standard of excellence. If you watch the old performances closely, what lingers isn't only the choreography, it's the dignity. A man trying to stay graceful even as life stopped cooperating. Sammy Davis Jr. He lived on a razor's edge, one wrong detail, and the joke would belong to someone else. To the public, Sammy Davis Jr. was precision, the ultimate entertainer who could sing, dance, act, and command a room with the kind of control that looked effortless. In an era when Vegas glamour was sold as perfection, Sammy showed up as the finished product: sharp suit, sharp timing, sharp smile. And he wasn't just a nightclub phenomenon. In 1972, the Candyman reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, proving he could still dominate mainstream America's scoreboard, not just the late-night stage. But what audiences rarely considered was the cost of staying assembled every time the curtain rose, especially for a black star performing in a country that didn't offer equal room for mistakes. Sammy's career was built under intense scrutiny. He didn't have the luxury of looking tired, aging visibly, or appearing careless. And for performers, hair is never only hair. It's part of the silhouette people recognize from a distance. It signals youth control and consistency. In the world Sammy came up in television close-ups, stage lights, tabloid curiosity, any change could become a headline, or worse, a punchline. Then came the hard truth that made image management more than vanity. In 1954, a car crash left Sammy with a devastating injury, and he ultimately lost his left eye. He returned to the public while still healing, sometimes wearing an eye patch, later adapting to a prosthetic eye, yet still expected to deliver flawless charisma as if nothing had happened. That experience taught a brutal lesson: the audience claps for the performance, not the pain. From then on, maintaining his appearance wasn't merely about looking good. It was about controlling what the world could use against him. The turning point in Sammy's story isn't one hair reveal. It's the lifelong pattern of refusal to give the public an unprotected version of him. He understood that show business, especially in his time, could be merciless. If your hairline shifted, if your face looked drawn, if you appeared anything less than polished, the conversation could turn cruel fast. For someone whose identity was tied to being the greatest entertainer, the private struggle wasn't simply baldness, it was the fear of being seen as fading. And that fear can drive constant upkeep, grooming, styling choices, camera angles, hats, lighting, small decisions that add up to a daily discipline most fans never notice. The consequence is a legacy shaped by both brilliance and burden. Sammy Davis Jr. died on May 16, 1990 at 64. After complications from throat cancer. A final reminder that the body eventually overrules the spotlight. But his image endures because he treated it like part of the act, not deception, but survival. When you look back at Sammy, you don't just see talent. You see a man who learned early and painfully that the stage rewards perfection and the world punishes vulnerability. His greatness wasn't only in what he could do, it was in how relentlessly he protected the version of himself the audience came to believe in night after night. Billy Stewart. He could make a melody dance, yet he lived like one bad glance could destroy him. To the public, Billy Stewart was style and control. A soul singer with a signature vocal flair, those quick rhythmic runs that made his records instantly recognizable, and enough confidence to take familiar material and make it feel new. He wasn't a minor name either. In the mid-1960s, he scored real chart success. Sitting in the Park reached number 4 on the R&B chart and number 24 on the Billboard Hot 100 1965. Then came his daring version of Summertime, which climbed to number 10 on the Hot 100 and number 7 on the R&B chart 1966. On stage and in photos, he was presented as the complete package, well-groomed, confident, and never caught looking anything less than composed. But privately, the fear wasn't about singing. It was about being seen as ordinary. In show business, hair can become a symbol people don't talk about out loud. Youth, strength, desirability, the illusion that the star never fades. For some performers, the first signs of thinning or a changing hairline don't feel like aging. They feel like exposure. And when a man believes he's judged not only by his voice but by his appearance, he may start building his entire routine around concealment, careful grooming, avoiding harsh light, refusing to be caught unprepared. The anxiety can become a constant hum. Every entrance, every backstage hallway, every camera flash. If you knew one moment of embarrassment could erase years of respect, would you ever stop hiding? The turning point in Billy's life was that the body doesn't cooperate with image. He dealt with serious health strain, diabetes, and worsening weight issues, conditions that can sap energy and complicate the demands of touring. Long drives, short sleep, hot stages, irregular meals. It's a hard environment even for a healthy person. When someone is already carrying health burdens, the effort to appear perfect becomes heavier. And if hair loss is part of what he feared, that pressure doesn't stay in the mirror, it spills into mood confidence and the way a person moves through the world, always guarding, always bracing for judgment. The consequence was devastating and final. On January 17, 1970, Billy Stewart died at 32 in a car accident near Smithfield, North Carolina, when the vehicle struck a bridge abutment and plunged into the Neuse River. 3 members of his band also died. The tragedy ended any chance of a later chapter. No comeback, no aging into a different kind of legend, no opportunity to let the public meet the man beyond the polished image. What remains is the contrast. Bright, agile records that still sound alive paired with the quiet reality that some stars carry a private battle to protect how they're seen. Billy Stewart's legacy is not only his voice, it's the reminder that fame can demand perfection and that demand can haunt a person long after the music stops.